Hey, deserving listeners. Recently, a former student of mine named Andy Wu reached out to me saying that he has been working with homeless people in Seattle as a marriage and family therapist. And I consider this topic to be very important. So I had him on the podcast to talk about this. And he's been working on the front lines with families, homeless people who are trying to get back on their feet, trying to recover from PTSD, domestic violence, this kind of thing, drug addiction. And he has effectively worked with his families and the team that works with them to get these people back on their feet, back in homes, back to safety, back employed. And there is a system to do that. And when we work as a society to fund these programs, then we can actually do a lot of work. But there's just not a lot of political will. There's a lot of myths that get propagated through society. Homeless people are lazy. They're just a bunch of drug addicts. They don't really want to live in homes. And Andy gets into this. He talks about, some people are kind of like that, but most people are not. And then he talks about all the cost savings that can go into actually proactively spending. Anyway, it's a great interview, and let's get to it. But before we get into it, I just want to note that this interview was over Zoom, which is never a great audio experience. So the audio isn't great, but I hope that that's okay. Let's get to the interview.
Hi, everybody. My name's Andy. I'm a marriage and family therapy associate. I graduated from Antioch in September of 2019, and I've been working in Seattle since as a homeless family social worker and therapist.
And what would you like to share? You reached out to me and said that you wanted to talk with the listeners about something. What would you like to talk about?
Everything that I've been seeing in the homeless services world, and how really it is a mental health issue, and how everything seems to be stemming from my client's mental health.
And you were working in Seattle with homeless clients, right? What do you think about the label homeless? Sometimes, just before moving forward, some people consider the label homeless to be disrespectful.
It's 50-50 in the homeless service providers. Some people prefer unsheltered. Some people prefer homeless.
What did your clients, did you ask them how they felt about it?
None of them really cared. They were more interested in getting into a place to live than what we called them.
So if you don't live in Seattle, then you might not know this, but for us in Seattle, the unsheltered or homeless issue has been in the news and very visible over the last 10 years. It's always been a problem. It's always been a part of the political landscape. But it's been a tent population, if you will, became much more visible. People living in tents that were just on the side of the street or the side of the highway, people living in RVs that were permanently parked at a park or a library or something, sometimes even an elementary school. On one side of the political spectrum, people were advocating for those people and saying, hey, those people have rights and they don't have anywhere else to go. And we're not going to lock them up like we used to do, because that's inhumane, just because they're trying to survive and they don't have anything else to do. And then the other end of the spectrum, you had people saying, well, they're camping in my front yard, or they are camping in front of this business. I'm trying to run a business and they're just like loitering and ruining my business, or they're creating situations where it's unsafe to be walking through my neighborhood, or there's fires being started. So there's been a lot of political debate to the point where during the last mayoral election, it was, according to polls, the most important political issue that people were voting about. I'm curious, Annie, since you were at the forefront working with individuals, was that even a part of their lives?
Yes, because I worked specifically I worked with families, but I did also work with a lot of single adults. The politics of it, they didn't really care. I mean, I understood why they didn't care. They have other things to worry about at the moment, but it did cause some problems for us So I worked at Catholic Community Services. We're one of the larger housing providers in the county, but it did cause a lot of problems for us. For example, down in Federal Way, we had a harm reduction enhanced shelter, and we're getting a lot of pushback from kind of everyone.
Not in my backyard stuff, NIMBY stuff.
Yes, but there is an aspect, like I understand both sides. I understand why you wouldn't want, I think this last fall, the needle exchange actually had to stop in Federal Way for, I think, about a month and a half because of community pressure.
So what would you say along these lines to someone that was like, I don't want this in my backyard? What would you say to them?
We need somewhere to help these people, and then the other side of things is, there really isn't a good answer other than like we just really need to fix the issue before it gets bigger.
What do you say to people that would say, but all the crime that happens with these individuals, what would you say?
Let's look at why the crime is starting. Like, what is the reason for the crime? Let's say there's an encampment somewhere. There, it's a public nuisance. The neighbors in the area want it out. It's causing damage to the profits of the businesses in the area. Typically, what happens is the PD and one of the different outreach organizations comes in, offers everyone a 2-week stay at a motel, obviously paid for by either tax dollars or contracted dollars to those different nonprofits. Millions of dollars spent clearing out the homeless encampment, and then the folks are moved into a motel for 2 weeks, just long enough for them to essentially clear out the encampment. Once the clients get out of the motel, all their stuff is gone. They don't have a place to go. Haven't been connected with social service providers. And then they're back out on the street. Well, they need a new tent. They need a new stove. They need a new blanket. They're not working. So there really isn't any other way to get it other than stealing, fortunately. And I get it. Like, stealing, it's a crime. It's bad. But at the end of the day, humans are focused on their own survival.
So what is the solution then? Is it to increase tax dollars to help them so they don't have to steal? Is that the kind of thing?
I think the new system of enhanced shelters is kind of the way to go. King County has been funding a lot of the new enhanced shelter programs. Been a lot of funding across the country for programs like this.
What are those and why are they better?
To explain what an enhanced shelter is, I have to give you an operating definition on what a regular shelter is first. So your typical single adult / family shelter is you check in at 8 p.m. There's dinner. You get a bed, usually a cot, maybe a private room. You might share a restroom and a shower with a few other families. You stay there overnight, and then you guys are out of there at 10 or 11 a.m. Kids go to school, mom or dad or both go to work, and then they can come check back in at 8 p.m. Not stable. Most people don't. Most families or single adults don't stay for more than a day or two in those situations. Sometimes they'll stay longer if it's really cold or snowing outside. It's stressful. It's like the best way I had. Here's another anecdote. I had a client tell me that they were afraid to take their shoes off and they used their gym bag as a pillow because if they took their shoes off or put their gym bag under their cot, it was going to get stolen.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds pretty chaotic and unsettling to essentially be kicked out of your house every morning and have to move back in the evening, especially for the kids, and that must be pretty upsetting for them. And so, as a marriage and family therapist, you were working with those kids. How did they talk about it?
Every kid took it, depending on the age, obviously, developmental ages and stuff. The younger kids often were a little easier and a little more adaptable. The teens were the ones that tend to have more problems. I probably worked with a total of 60 or so families in the last year or so. I'd say 10 of them had teenagers in them, and I'd say we had I think 3 or 4 CORES referrals, 2 or 3 WISE referrals, and two trips to Children's with those teen families. So I just noticed teens take it a lot harder when the families are homeless.
Yeah, so typical things that I would see, not necessarily with homeless families, but just with teens struggling with poverty, would be gang activity, crime, not going to school, defiance, not listening to the parents, drug use. Did you see that kind of thing?
Drug use was just an expectation almost. Not so much the gang involvement, given that a lot of my families were coming from all over the country and all over King County or even all over Washington. So they never really had a chance to establish
connections.
Yeah. So there's a lot less of the like gang activity, but then on that same kind of side, there's a lot less like involvement with clubs or involvement with the community. It's a lot of isolation for some of these homeless families and individuals.
Yeah, the shame of being homeless as a teenager and not wanting to reveal that. I mean, that would be a hard thing to disclose at school, and it'd be easier to not have any friends, and then you'd never have to reveal that fact.
But yeah, especially once like nowadays in a high school, the status symbol is $750 pair of sneakers.
Right. So you're advocating for enhanced shelters. What are those?
So enhanced shelters are, and obviously it changes from company to company or region to region, but enhanced shelters are generally clients can stay there for a certain period of time, usually somewhere between 30 to 90 days. They'll have access to their own room that they can lock. They'll usually have a restroom in there, a shower. King County has been recently converting a lot of old motels and hotels into enhanced shelters. It's staffed 24 hours a day, case manager, multiple frontline like service staff. Usually there's a therapist, a psychiatrist, or ARNP, a nurse, different case managers, and different outreach workers, housing case managers, and just all these people can access the different clients and provide services, help them get clean if they want, help them manage their mental health, get them connected with the prescriber, help them work with them on employment or getting SSI if they're disabled. And the reason this works because the homeless folks are connected with case managers, but it's so hard. One of my major parts of my job was an outreach worker. I would go into the community looking for folks. There were many times where it was literally, "Hey, we need to find so and so in the next week and a half," because they just got accepted into their permanent supportive housing unit, which is housing for disabled individuals at 30% of their income for the rest of their life. But if you can't find the person, you can't sign all the paperwork, you can't get them into housing.
Yeah, and of course we understand as systems thinkers how this works. That okay, great, you have a roof over your head, but now you've got to make an appointment with your physician, and that's across town. You need a phone. You can't afford a phone. You have to borrow the phone from the shelter. It's too late because it's 8 o'clock at night, so you got to wait till the morning. Everyone's using the phone. You got to skedaddle at 8 o'clock, and you can never. And even if you did make the appointment, how do you get there? And when you got kids and all those other kinds of things. So if the services are right there in the shelter, then obviously it makes it a lot more convenient. And once you can get on your feet and you can start to get the treatment you need, you start to make the connections, you start to get the services, you start to perhaps even heal emotionally from some of the problems, then you have the foundation upon which you can start to build a life that can lead to stability and lead to more long-term employment, long-term housing, that kind of thing. So that's what that's where you worked in an enhanced shelter?
A lot of the family shelters I went to, yeah, were enhanced shelters. And then my single adults so I work with single adults, but I have a single adults team. My single adults team actually works in all of the Catholic Community Services enhanced shelters.
I'm sure you heard a lot of stories, and I'm sure every story is different, but tell us some stories because I find that people have a hard time understanding why people become homeless in the first place. There's a lot of stereotypes. So what did you hear from people?
The most publicly visible homeless folks are the single adults that are camped out in the middle of the city. The ones we don't see are the ones that are doubled up with family or living in an RV in a rest stop somewhere, or they're fleeing domestic violence and they're staying in their car in a safe parking site somewhere, or they're in a shelter.
Right. So when people think homeless people in Seattle, they think the fella that's sleeping in a tent outside the theater downtown Seattle, but that's part of it, but not the entire population for sure, because we don't hear those stories very often. We don't see those stories very often. But you worked a lot with them.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say 85% of my caseload was families, at least one adult with at least one child under 18.
Yeah. So what was it that brought them to homelessness?
I've kind of heard it all. Like, I've heard tree falling through my house. I've heard fleeing domestic violence. I've heard house fire. I've heard drug use. I've heard coronavirus. I've heard medical issue, had to leave the country to get medical or surgery, come back, and owner had evicted them. Feels like literally anything can lead to homelessness at this point. In fact, up until even just the last week I was working at CCS, I'm still hearing new things.
Yeah. Because so many people in the United States, because of income disparity, are a paycheck away from homelessness, right? And so if anything gets in the way of that, like you said, the emergency surgery, and they come back and they couldn't pay rent, and the landlord just booted them, and so they have nowhere to live. And then when you have nowhere to live, it's hard to get a job, and everything just starts to fall apart. Coronavirus, tell me about that.
I've had clients whose spouses died from COVID. I've had people who have lost work due to COVID and couldn't find new work. I had clients whose kids' schools closed down, so they had to stay home and watch the kids, and then they couldn't pay rent, and then they ended up homeless.
I mean, this is the side of the virus that was not talked about very much because it's not very middle class, right? Because so many people in Seattle, middle class wise, could work from home. You and I included. Well, I assume you could work from. Could you work? Did they allow you to work from home during the pandemic?
They did, but I mean, it's, as you can imagine, it's a lot harder to work with my client population. It's not in person.
So, did you go in during the pandemic?
3 or 4 days out of the week. We reserved one day at home so I could do homework or all the paperwork.
Did you ever get the virus?
Nope.
So you masked up and everything?
I mean, I could still see even through Zoom, I could see all the acne on my face from the masks. We were double masked pretty much even before the CDC encouraged us to.
Well, with the virus, of course, you have, of course, we know this, that especially people that would work in restaurants, a lot of restaurants just closed temporarily, even permanently. And so bye-bye job, right? And you're thinking, well, what do I do? And of course, if your skills are in the restaurant industry, you're not going to find another job in the restaurant industry. So what are you going to do? Well, and if you're one paycheck away from not being able to pay your rent, then it's only a couple months before you're evicted, and you start maybe couch surfing. If you have kids, you're begging family to stay with. If you don't have those connections, or those connections were the people who traumatized you to begin with, what are you supposed to do? And then boom, and you don't want to pull your kids out of the school that they're in. And you're just like, well, I guess I'll I mean, do people know where to turn? I mean, or do they just end up on the street and bump into a social worker? So what happens to people?
People will call this. I don't like 211, but unfortunately, it's what everyone knows. People will call 211 enough times till someone eventually gets them connected to the right place.
What is 211?
It's like a local directory of pretty much everything. They don't update it very often, and often any services for homeless folks or people who love low income or needing food or shelter, those are usually not updated or correct.
So people call 211 asking, look, I don't have anywhere to sleep tonight. What can I do? Maybe they even go online and search for something there, and then they get a hold of a social worker or a caseworker that can connect them with a shelter, that kind of thing.
Yep. For single adults, that's more the case. For families, there is a family intake line for King County where they call, and it's a centralized line that gets them connected with a lot of the family shelters in the county.
As the therapist for the parents, what kind of emotional space were the parents in typically?
Oh boy. I mean, sheer anxiety. I mean, how long can I stay at the shelter? Where am I going next? What am I going to eat? I need a job. How am I going to a 2-bedroom in anywhere in the county at the moment? It's the minimum of $1,600. Most places require a first and a security deposit, and then usually something a little more on top. So we're talking how is a single mother working a minimum wage job going to save $4,000 for moving costs? Or how is she going to make 3 times the income, which is one of the things a lot of apartment complexes require?
Meanwhile, Jeff Bezos has trillions of dollars. Did that ever bother you, just seeing all the rich people in Seattle?
Yes. Oh boy. I mean, it's still, even as a grad student, it bothered me. I mean, I joke about it all the time, but I have a master's degree in marriage and family therapy, and I'm getting paid a little bit more than what Sound pays at Catholic Community Services, but I'm not going to say for obvious reasons. But even then, I still technically am making under median income with a master's degree.
Yeah. which we can blame the taxpayer and the politicians for that, for not allocating the funds. I mean, that's really where it comes from, which I've been railing about for a long time. Yeah, that must have just been a trip to go to work and to see these people struggling. And, $4,000 to a rich person is nothing. That's it, they wouldn't even notice it. And it would mean the difference between life and death for these parents with their kids. And the fact that we can't get the connection there, right? That we can't manage the humanness to facilitate that, because I'm guessing even if you went to the rich people and said, hey, can you help this individual? They probably would, right? But there's just this willful ignorance on behalf of the middle rich and the upper rich that, well, someone's taking care of it, right? There's taxes, there's welfare, there's people like you, Andy, someone will figure out, there's people that'll help them. What would you say to that?
I tell them to look up the bystander effect. The more people that are listening and foreseeing a situation, the less likely any single person will call or do anything about it.
Do you ever have people give and out of compassion, like directly to these families? Like a church that gets a fund for a family, or I don't know, does that ever happen?
Actually, yeah, there's quite a few resources. In all the shelters I work with, they usually have kind of resource navigator or like charity or like a volunteer coordinator. We get tons of the shelters get food donated by different churches. There are different organizations that do things like diapers and maternity stuff, parenting classes. Yeah, there is support in the community, but it's not around what's important, and that's usually moving them into housing or supported employment.
Supported employment.
As you can imagine, some folks coming out of homelessness, especially if they've been homeless for 10 or 15 years, aren't used to working at a job. Yeah. They will probably need some kind of job training to learn some kind of applicable skills or to find some kind of work that is appropriate for them if they're disabled in one way or the other.
Disabled in what way?
Ranges from like work. I have clients who suffered severe accidents when they were still housed and started on oxys. Doctor cut them off oxys and they turned to heroin
because of the pain.
Yeah, exactly, because of the pain. And then even once you stop using heroin, that pain is still there if they didn't do PT, or they might not be able to get their arm over their head. We
just let these systems happen such that people that are struggling and for no fault of their own, and of course there's a certain group of people that would look at someone like that and go, oh, well, they're a dirty, strung out addict and they lack willpower and look what they did this to themselves. Do you remember the documentaries that were coming out? I think King 5, like Seattle is Dying. Do you remember these documentaries?
Honestly, I don't think Seattle's dying. I think Seattle's just going through growing pains. I grew up in Los Angeles, like the unofficial homeless capital of the country, apparently. Every major city in the country has a homelessness problem once it gets big enough. Even smaller ones. Talk about Everett here. Everett has pretty large, substantial, like unsheltered and homeless population, but zero resources.
The documentary, Seattle is Dying, the thesis of the documentary was that the politicians and the people were telling the police to not do anything or else they were going to get punished or something. And so the system, the criminal justice system, was essentially just hands off, a revolving door for some of these individuals. They were essentially painting all unsheltered people as criminals, as people who weren't just trying to make ends meet, but who actually just didn't care about human beings. These are psychopaths living on the street, or people who are suffering from pretty severe schizophrenia and don't really understand what's happening from minute to minute. And that because we have such a liberal population in Seattle that's telling the police they can't do anything, they're just letting all these criminals run the streets. And, that am I describing the piece accurately?
I think so. Yeah. I remember this part of it. And that was definitely one part of it that definitely didn't agree with.
Do you find that any of the people that you came across, maybe they were clients or your colleagues' clients, who were like the stereotype of someone who was purposely trying to create mayhem and didn't want to be sheltered, liked living on the street, liked doing their own thing, and liked being able to commit petty crimes repeatedly and laughed about it the way that the documentary on Channel 5 exhibited? No?
No. Then again, also, those aren't the people that would come to a social worker to ask for help.
Right. With the people that you came across, how many of them got out of homelessness? How many of them got sheltered in homes and jobs and managed to get back on their feet?
I'm smiling because I actually did this number right before I left. I believe I've housed 36 families, 15 and I have 15 that are pending move-in. They've got something like all of their move-in costs covered and they're ready to like pay their own rents. I've housed probably about 10 single adults also.
Is it just like the most gratifying, wonderful, tear-jerky moment when that happens?
Oh my God, heck yes. Oh my God. Like I had one client, single mother of four, declined from 3 apartments because she made too much because her child on paper she's supposed to be receiving child support, but she doesn't get child support. So she makes too much even though she doesn't make the money. It was the most depressing thing in the world to find out she gets declined because she was quote unquote over income. But we got her into a place. Yeah, it's the most gratifying feeling in the world when like.
And these are places that they're paying for or what?
Usually they're either paying for it on their own or they've got some kind of temporary housing support or subsidy. Or most recently, King County actually released a lot of Section 8 vouchers out to the world. So those have been super helpful, especially for a lot of the families escaping domestic violence, or specifically the single women.
I'm just trying to think like what dollar amount it would take. And if these, because, the stereotype is, well, these people they want to be homeless, or they're going to be homeless no matter what, because they're dysfunctional human beings. And it's not a matter of economics, it's a matter of them being crazy or lacking willpower or something. Like, what do you see what I'm getting at here? So like,
Yeah.
How much your prediction of these people, if they had a good chunk of money, would they succeed?
I think 70% of the people I've worked with, yes, because honestly, most of the mental health issues that I'm running to is anxiety stemming from being homeless, right, or unsheltered, or living in your car, or sometimes having to even live at a shelter.
Yeah,
there are some really bad shelters out there, not to name any names.
Yeah. So then the other 30%, what barrier would they run into?
We talk about PTSD from being a DV survivor. We talk about drug abuse. We talk about severe mental disabilities, so much undiagnosed autism and ADHD. We talk about lack of medication for, say, mood disorders. We talk about criminal records, evictions, like if they've been evicted before, if they didn't know how to end a lease the correct legal way when they couldn't pay anymore. Yeah, I mean, I've had families literally not stay at a place in the apartment charging for 6 months because they never, quote unquote, terminated their lease.
So with PTSD, for example, managed to get into a place, but every day is a struggle emotionally for them, and they're suffering from severe depression, demoralization, suicide maybe. Hard for them to get out of bed, hard for them to stay regulated, and maybe turning to substances to cope. And getting a job is going to be hard in that situation, which is going to lead them to homelessness again. Is that what you're talking about?
Yep. That's the 30%, because like we could throw $20,000, let's say single mother of 3, which she gets a job, then eventually something's going to happen, especially if like she's not following up with services, or like providers aren't working with her, or don't show up for 2 days, you'll lose your job.
Right.
You lose your job, you can't pay your rents, you're getting evicted, you've got tons of money to owe. Then you're back in a shelter, except this time you've got an eviction on your record and you owe like $10,000.
Eviction on your record. Oh, interesting. I hadn't thought about that. That the next landlord won't accept you because you have an eviction. So it leads to more homelessness. Great. Oh boy. Did you ever feel bad going home to a home?
I don't. I mean, I felt a little bit of guilt, but I mean that's the same like kind of any therapist has to manage their kind of what they hear and see every single day at work. Mine's just slightly a little different.
Yeah. I mean, you shouldn't feel bad, right? Because at least you're doing something about it, right? Did you ever, or do you have colleagues? I could imagine myself just being like, I'll just take you home with, you could just live with me for a week, we'll get you back on your feet, you know?
I mean, I obviously did do that because I still have my license, but um, I had some coworkers joke about it. Like, I could just take some of those kids and they can stay with me. And it's because she really loved working with kids, but I don't think
Yeah.
she actually would do that.
Yeah. I mean, it's so scary to think about. So you're saying that the long-term solution would be we raise taxes or we allocate taxes for more enhanced shelters so that people can get a place to live and a meal, safety, but also have all the services that are right there in on site so that they can get all those services with that model and with a case manager helping them to get connected, hooking them up with a place to live, people helping them with getting a job, you helping them with mental health. That's the model that will help pretty good percentage of those people who are, for some people, chronically homeless and seemingly in the endless loop of being homeless. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Yep.
You've seen it work so many times.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there are some cases where, as a therapist yourself, there's some cases that walk in and it's like, okay, this is going to be a lot of work.
Yeah. What do we do about those individual homeless individuals that are in the tents downtown? Are they also in this category that you're talking about?
I think yes. I think yes, but it's going to take a very determined outreach worker to get through to them.
What do they need to be convinced of? Like to trust the system kind of thing?
To trust that someone's actually going to help them. One of the biggest complaints I had from clients was I've called 15 different places. 15 different people have told me they wanted to help me and are trying to help me, but 15 people haven't been able to help. So it's like we talk about like community mental health, switching therapists and how horrible that is for the therapeutic relationship. But imagine going to 15 people that couldn't help you and said they could, and you told them your entire story and nothing happened.
Yeah, that's interesting.
It takes 3 hours to call DSHS to get food stamps activated or to get pretty much anything from DSHS. That's assuming you don't get dropped halfway through, like you were saying about your insurance.
Do you know because we have people who listen in, say, Europe or South America, do you know anything about the state of affairs in other countries? I'm sure it varies quite a bit, but do you know anything about that?
Most European countries will have some kind of subsidized government-based housing for just a social security net. So this is frankly, at least from what my understanding is, if you're homeless in a lot of like Western European countries or like the UK, you're choosing to be because if you do the paperwork over there, they will support you. But I mean, as you can imagine, there's barriers too.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems like the right thing to do morally and systemically as well, because you spend a little bit up front for housing and you save a lot of money from other kinds of problems, right?
Oh, not even that. I mean, I was talking to a judge a few months ago, and I asked him how much it cost to run his courtroom. He told me in the 90s in Oregon, it cost him $10,000 an hour to run his courtroom.
Right.
Simple misdemeanor drug charge. Let's say you're in court for 30 minutes. That's $5,000 of time that the city just paid just for the court date. That doesn't include going to jail, being processed, the police officer's time, and the overtime that was paid, removing the stuff that was in his encampment if they decided to do that, processing the ticket, chasing after the ticket, finally dismissing the ticket because they finally give up on looking for the guy. I mean, we're talking $2,000 a month for a house and food.
Wow.
I mean, like, come on, it's economics at that point. It's like, I get paid $30 or so an hour. I can meet with them. We'll say the minimum 10 sessions.
Yeah.
$300 out of the taxes, like the county's coffers. House them for a month, $1,500. Food, $500. Another counselor, another registered nurse that we have on salary. I mean, add it all up, it's still not going to come out to $5,000.
Right.
And at that point, you've done so much more for that person and your city, because they're not there's a much higher chance that they're not going to end back up in that court at a rate of $10,000 an hour.
Wow. You've opened, I'm guessing, some eyes. You've reopened my eyes about this. Thanks for coming on the podcast, Sandy.
Oh, no problem.
The last time I chatted with you, you were, mid graduate school. So it's pretty amazing to see you all professional and stuff. Like, you really know your stuff and you seem really confident, and
yeah, it's been a while since we've talked.
Been around the block a few times since I last talked to you.
Yeah. Oh yeah. COVID has been COVID plus this job has been a huge trial by fire. And
I'll say
it's been a huge learning experience.
Yeah. Good for you. Good for you. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it.